Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I'm your host, Brian Weinstein. Today, we welcome back guest Adam Jerugim. Adam previously told about seeing Harry Hood on April 18th, 1992 at Stanford University. And after today, he seems to be the attendance bias resident expert on West Coast Phish in the 90s. What I mean by that is, in today's episode, Adam and I expand our conversation from one song to a full show, and that full show is Phish at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco on May 27th, 1994. This was the third of three shows at the Warfield, and it came toward the very end of the 1994 spring tour. On Attendance Bias, my guests and I often talk about transitional years and signposts to major musical changes in the Phish evolution, but when it comes to the late spring and summer of 1994, it's okay sometimes to just sit back and show some love to a band at a major peak. This show, while maybe not a tentpole of a peak year, still has superlative versions of David Bowie, Harry Hood, Reba, plus some trademark Phish goofiness and oddity guest appearances. But we get into all that in a moment. One theme that I loved talking about with Adam today was Phish's growing popularity on the West Coast at this time. While the band would make their debut at Madison Square Garden late in the year and celebrate New Year's Eve at Boston Garden, they were still reasonably in the middle of the pack when it came to the West Coast. Selling out 3 nights at the Warfield seemed to send a signal that things were about to change big time from coast to coast. So let's join Adam to talk about the Bay Bridge, opera singers, and whether shushing is better than wooing as we discuss May 27th, 1994 at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco. Adam, welcome back to Attendance Bias. How have you been?
Very good. Thank you for having me back.
I'm very happy to have you back, especially since you're bringing a great show to the attention of this audience, but also to my attention because I had tons of tapes from this week of 94. And for those of you listening at home, the date that Adam and I are going to speak about is May 27th, 1994 at the Warfield in San Francisco. I had mostly tapes from the dates right after this at the Laguna Seca days, which closed this run, which closed this tour. So to hear a show from the same week within days, but it's still a new show to me, I'm excited that you brought it up.
Yeah, this show was the last show that I saw of their theater club era. So I've been seeing shows for a couple of years, and this was the last time that I saw the band play the Warfield, which holds about 2,000 people. I'd seen Jerry Band there maybe 40 times, but Phish I've only seen there twice, and this was the last time.
Right, and it's very likely, you never know, but it's very likely you won't see them there again.
Most likely, yeah.
It's fair to say
people did get to see Phil and Friends with Paige and Trey there for 3 nights, and those are legendary shows. I didn't get to go. I got shut out of those, but still have FOMO to this day.
Well, Adam, you were previously on this show, and we got to know you a little bit as a fan, as a Phish fan, but let's get to know you a little bit deeper with part 2 of the Adam Jerugim Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
So the last time you were here, you told us about your first show, which was April 15th, 1992 in Los Angeles. And what venue was that?
That was the Variety Theater in Los Angeles in downtown LA. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was the first time Phish ever played in Los Angeles.
Right. We talked about that, the whole expansion to the West Coast and making a name for themselves. But anyway, that was your first show. So to update it a little bit, what was your second show and what do you remember from it?
The second show is the next night at a little theater club called the Anaconda Theater in Santa Barbara. Technically Isla Vista. And what's funny is I grew up going to Isla Vista, UC Santa Barbara for summer camp every summer for at least a week. So this was a place that I used to go. It was a bank first, and it was an arcade that I used to go play arcade games at. And then I showed up to see Phish, and it was the same room. And there were probably only a couple hundred people there, but I actually hung out with Trey and Dave Schools in the parking lot for a few hours before the show. It was such a small show that they let us go out at halftime and get pizza across the street and come back if we wanted to. It was a wonderful, small experience. And Mike, the next night in front of my first Warfield show, he's like, that show that we just played in Santa Barbara last night, that was the best show we've played of this entire tour. And I was like, I had nothing to compare it to, right? I mean, I'd been listening to tapes, but I didn't really know. This Anaconda show became a show that everyone got on tape when you were getting into Phish in the 90s, right? If you were getting into Phish, people were like, you got to listen to this Anaconda show. Not only does Trey explain the whole Gamehenge thing at this show, but there are world-class versions of a ton of songs. Possum, you got the Machine Gun Tray. It's the entire Phish experience, and it was an essential listen. And honestly, it still should be for everybody. If you've never listened to it, you should. It's an incredible show.
I agree. That show is formative for me. It was the first show I believe that I ever had on soundboard as a tape. And it was the first show where I realized the power of Mike in a Phish context. And what I mean by that is I first got into the band in 1996 and 97. So you would think, especially in 1997 with the Cal Funk era, that Mike was so prominent, right? He was turned up all the way and kind of leading the band lots of the time. But it was a lot of funk jams. So it was a lot of repetitive. It wasn't exactly what you would, or what I would at the time call traditional Phish. At the time, it was new. But the show that you're talking about, this Anaconda show, and you were talking about all the Gamehenge being introduced, that to me is Mike within Phish, not Mike within funk. And so that version of Possum that you mentioned, just hearing the intro with all the secret language signals, and you could hear Mike, it's almost like he was overlaid on top of the rest of the band after the fact, like he was playing to a tape of the rest of the band. That's how prominent and loud and featured he is. So I agree with you. Anyone listening to this podcast that has not heard April 16th, 1992, at the, I thought it was called the Anaconda Theater. Am I right or wrong?
It is Anaconda Theater, Isla Vista,
right.
California.
Right. So if you haven't heard that show, right after this episode, go back and listen to it. Absolute essential listening. And going back to the last time we spoke also, at that time, your most recent show was New Year's Eve 2019 with the Clones. This was right before the whole world shut down and everyone went crazy. So we've been through a lot since then. As of today, as of this recording, what was your most recent Phish show and what did you think?
I saw the last show that I saw was the last show at the Sphere, and it was really memorable. I wouldn't say it's the best Phish music I've ever seen, but as an experience, it was really incredible.
I can't wait to talk to somebody about the Sphere. I don't think this is the time or place because we're going to focus on the show in San Francisco, but that's what I hear from almost everyone who mentioned it to me or who was there, that it was more about the experience and less about going back to listen to the tapes, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a math nerd. I'm an engineer. I sat in this place thinking about how it was built, what the math was used to build it, how the sound was working, how the lighting was working, the whole thing. And I spent, an entire weekend thinking about the mechanics of it, which is awesome. I mean, there's no other music venue, and I know we shouldn't really get into this. There's no other music venue that I've been to that is like it. And as much as I am not a huge fan of the guy who built it, I give him props for building a venue that people are going to come from all over the world to see music at.
Are you referencing James Dolan?
Yes.
Yes, I'm not a big fan of James Dolan. I had just real quick, because I don't know if I'll ever get the opportunity again to tell this story, but I've met James Dolan once. It was at Bonnaroo in 2006. For anyone who doesn't know, James Dolan is the owner of Madison Square Garden Inc., the Knicks, and the Rangers, and he is a huge asshole that most people, I would say 99% of people, at least in New York, hate. He is a selfish little troll of a man, and he also happens to have his own band called JD and the Straight Shots. They are a crappy little blues band, and he sings, plays lead guitar, and harmonica. In fact, one year, this is a rumor that I heard, at the Madison Square Garden Company Christmas party, he rented out Irving Plaza, which is like a mid-size, small-size club in New York City in Manhattan, and his own band played the holiday Christmas party, which is so selfish and self-centered. And the cherry on top is that half of the employees left at set break.
That's hilarious.
So I met him at Bonnaroo because his band was playing all the way in the back of the main stage, like on this little tent. And I was there just because I saw him on the lineup, and I got a picture with him. And I asked him, what's the plan for the Knicks? This is 2006, so the Knicks were completely in no man's land, right? They were in the wilderness. And he's like, well, we're going to win next year. And I said, all right, buddy, good luck. I was already disgusted with him. Anyway, that's my James Dolan story. Fuck him.
Yeah.
Moving
But
back.
again,
Yeah.
props to him for building a venue there's no other place on earth with the video and sound capabilities that venue has. And people are going to go from all over the world to see music there.
I'm sure I'll be
and my
one
wife
of them.
was there last night to see Dead and Company.
Well, I'm sure I'll be there eventually, and I hope she had a good time.
I'm sure she did. Now she has to convince me to go.
Going back before 1992, before you discovered Phish, what was your favorite band? Like, what's your musical pedigree pre-Phish?
Well, I grew up with a hippie mom, so I grew up with Rolling Stones and Beatles as my first favorite bands when I was really young. But when I got to choose on my own, everything led me to the Grateful Dead. So before Phish, it was really Grateful Dead. And actually, last time I talked to you, I was at this weird place where I'd seen 151 Grateful Dead shows and 151 Phish shows and stuck there during COVID with an even amount where I couldn't say that I'd seen one more or the other. Now I'm obviously ahead on the Phish shows, but between seeing Jerry Band and Grateful Dead, it was at least 200 shows.
You seem to be personality-wise pretty, I don't want to use the word straight-laced, but you have it pretty much together. You seem reliable, like a straightforward kind of guy. So when you go to see a Phish show with a group of friends, what role do you play? Are you the babysitter that looks out for everybody? Are you the guy who shows up an hour late? Are you the late night partier who, you're going to a fourth location after the show is over? How do you see yourself as a persona within a larger group at a show?
I actually like to get to the venue early and hang out there for a while so I can talk to people before the show instead of during the show. People should pick up on that and do more of that. I always wonder why people talk through shows that they pay hundreds of dollars to see, but hey, we're all there to do our thing. So yeah, I'm an early person, right? So I'll go early. I want to hang out. I want to talk to friends before the show. We might go out for something after the show, but I'm not a late night show or multiple really late night person. I like getting sleep a lot. And there was a time when I was much younger where I didn't really care about sleep. And God bless the Grateful Dead. When they did a 4-night run, it was 2 shows with the night off and then 2 more shows. And Phish, they don't really seem to care about our constitution as much. So when you do 4 shows in a row, you really kind of pace yourself. You got to.
And finally, you've told the story about your wife being pulled on stage twice, right? Was that to do the meat stick dance, if I remember correctly?
That's right, yeah.
What is the second weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show after your wife being pulled on stage twice?
I'm going to use the show that we're going to talk about right now as an example because, and it's funny because I listened to this back a few times and it's really the part of the show where things get really special. But like, they have a jam towards the end of the second set and it just dissolves into almost nothing. And then out of nothing, you've got an opera singer.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, we're going to get there. But that's definitely one of the strangest things I've seen at a Phish show.
When was this show played?
The 1994 spring tour was 45 shows, almost the number of shows that the band plays in a calendar year these days. It started on April 4th in Burlington, which I believe was at the Flynn Theater, and ended, like we mentioned earlier, just a couple of shows after today's on May 29th at the Laguna Seca Raceway in Salinas, which is, you and I were talking off mic, just southwest of San Francisco. And the summer tour, it should be noted, was 29 shows, started just 10 days after this spring tour ended. Not a lot of time, not a lot of rest for the weary, to your point, in those days for the band, not just for the fans. And then also, to put the set lists in context, Hoist was released on March 29th, just before the tour commenced at the beginning of April. So we'll see, and we'll talk about this littered throughout almost every set list on this tour. Songs like Julius, Sample in a Jar would be everywhere. Wolfman's Brother would pop up pretty frequently. If I Could, right, shows up in today's show. So it's going to be pretty common for what now would be considered classics, and in the case of If I Could, rarities, to be pretty normally seen in the spring of 94. So the summer tour would see the band return to the regular sheds, I guess I could call them, like Walnut Creek, Great Woods, Jones Beach, SPAC. The venues on the spring tour kind of alternated between nightclubs in areas where the band was less popular at the time. And I think shows, and I bring this one up a million times, the Edge nightclub in Orlando, which is at the end of April, it's like a very small club, I think like 1,000-person capacity, and the Bomb Factory in Dallas with the famous Tweezer Fest, which had like a capacity of I think 800 or 1,000 people, and it wasn't even all the way full. And then there would be 1,500 and 2,500 seat proper theaters like the Warfield. So it kind of depended on the size of the city and how popular the band was throughout this tour. The venue size would change and on a sliding scale. So this was the 27th, May 27th, the last of 3 nights at the Warfield. For a band that struggled to get off the ground for a while on the West Coast, you talked about this in our previous episode. That's pretty impressive. How crowded were these shows? Do you remember? And did you go to all 3 of them?
I didn't actually go to all 3. This was at a point in my life where I was actually trying to finish college. So I was putting more energy into actually taking classes and finishing school than going to shows. I had spent the day in Berkeley trying to find housing because I was about to go up there to do an internship for 6 months. And my friend who I was with was like, Phish is playing tonight at the Warfield. I was like, oh, maybe we should go and check it out. So these shows were all sold out, which is way different than the first time I was there, which I remember the show either being 2/3 sold or maybe half sold. So in 2 years, they'd gone from not being able to sell at the Warfield to being able to sell it out. The secret that I knew from the Jerry days was that they held 100 tickets at the box office for every show. So if you got there early in the afternoon and were one of 50 people that got in line first, you were guaranteed 2 tickets. So I'd spent the day looking for housing, and then my friend and I drove over the bridge. We were in San Francisco. We get in line, and we go through the line, and they're like, well, here are your 2 tickets. And they happen to be front row of the balcony right next to the soundboard, or whatever, to the left of wherever the soundboard lighting rig was. It was basically center of the balcony, like probably the best seats you could get in the whole venue. It was incredible and completely lucky. So that was awesome, and the show was sold out.
Do you remember, this is kind of a vague question, so forgive me for that, but when you went to these shows or this show at the Warfield, do you remember if there were more fans in the know, or were there a lot of people going to their first show? What was the scene like in California in 1994 for Phish?
I think that a lot more people knew what was going on, and there was a lot of crossover at that point between Grateful Dead fans and Phish fans. We were all witnessing in real time the end of the Grateful Dead. And especially from my first tour in 1992, the energy of Phish was so much more than what the Grateful Dead could do at the time, and fit so much better with me and my other friends that were in college at the time and in our 20s. I think a lot of people had caught on for sure. So it's still to this day, if Phish plays somewhere like the Greek in Berkeley that only holds 7,000 people, they're going to sell out every show. But if they play the Shoreline, which holds 20,000 people, they might not sell them out. We're talking about that Shoreline show. So they did cancel the Tahoe shows in 2021, and the backup was to go to Shoreline. And what they did was they were like, well, we've only sold 7,000 tickets. The venue holds 20,000 people. Just go in and pick wherever you'd like to be. I've been going to Shoreline for 35 years now, more than 35 years. I've never had the opportunity to just walk in to the pavilion and pick my seats. It was incredible.
So of all the shows you could have picked, right? You've been on once. You emailed me for this show of May 27th, 94. Why do you have attendance bias toward it?
A couple reasons. One is we're about to hit the 30-year anniversary of it, so I figured we should talk about it. It's memorable because of the mac and cheese, and specifically the Flintstones mac and cheese. This was wild, and it really fits Phish's ethos, right? Where this is who they are. They're a band that likes to have fun and do unique things. And for us to all suddenly be holding mac and cheese boxes in the middle of the show and shaking it along with the band, it's something I'll never forget. It was really fun and really unique, and really reminded me why I really love this band.
Set 1.
Set 1 opens with Wilson. The intro is on the piano with the other instruments slowly joining in, and the Wilson chant isn't yet automatic. It should be noted that 94 was the year where it developed. I remember listening to a show, I forget which the date is, or they played 3 nights at the Beacon Theater in April at the beginning of this tour, when the band it almost seemed like they were practicing self-restraint not to sing the Wilson intro, like they were forcing it out of the audience. So it gets there eventually in this version, in this show. I'm wondering if over the course of the tour, the people who were touring with the band were kind of getting the hint that now there's an audience participation introduction to Wilson, as opposed to before this, when the band was just singing the Wilson refrain. The intro is 1 minute and 20 minutes long.
It's interesting because I remember hearing a tape from March 20th, 1992 at the Broome County Binghamton, right? It's the place the Grateful Dead played. And it may have been earlier this year in 1993. And I remember hearing this show and being like, this is what Phish could be. We're not experiencing this on the West Coast yet, but people were already chanting Wilson at that show. And I could hear it. And I was like, okay, I get it. It's like really growing on the East. And if people pick it up on the West, then, they'll understand it. And I guess by this tour, and you're right, it doesn't automatically happen, but by like a couple minutes into the song, people are chanting along with the band.
Yeah, 1 minute 20. So I think the band is kind of being very patient. Everyone always talks about the patience that Phish shows in their jamming. This is a different version of that, or through a different lens, where it's, let's not force it on the audience. Let's wait for them to come to us because we sense it's happening already. Let's let it organically grow, which makes it more fun in the end.
It does. And to be honest, like, one of the interesting things about the show in general, there's a lot of parts through the show where they go silent in the middle of songs in places where you wouldn't expect. And part of it is because you're in this little theater where they can do that and hear everything and everyone can hear everything. It's something that I was writing down in my notes. There's a lot of times where they just, quiet it down and then bring it where you're like, oh, maybe they're done with the song. Oh, no, it's coming back.
Yeah, well, they follow up Wilson with a classic placement of Runaway Jim, which to me is good. It's big, it's strong, it's a little messy. There's a type 1 jam by around 5 minutes, but it may as well be the opener. Not to discount Wilson, but it doesn't call a lot of attention to itself. And third, to what you just said, is foam. And one of the first notes that I wrote was that great Page piano solo at 4 minutes that gets, in all capital letters, I wrote, super quiet. So it's always impressive to me when they're jamming, but they almost can't. You have to wonder how they hear one another, because as the audience, you can't even hear what they're playing.
Especially now in bigger rooms, you're like, how do they even hear each other? And that's what I was thinking at the Sphere, but they managed to make it work. And actually, the Sphere it took me halfway through the first show to realize that it was wall of sound, where they didn't have amps on stage.
Right, right, and that's what they tested out at the Beacon Theater when Trey played an acoustic solo show, just kind of on the spur of the moment, where the big push of it was, we're going to test out this new sound system that's going to be at the Sphere when it opens, and it was fabulous. I literally had second to last row seats, and it sounded like I could have been front row at the theater. Very impressive. Yeah, but Foam is the first time that they're playing this super quiet but accurate jam. They wouldn't be able to do that very much longer as their venue size increases, and they follow it up with bouncing around the room, which is a nice cool down. Always a favorite of mine.
Yeah, it was impressive listening to Foam and hearing how practiced it was.
Yeah, we don't always get that.
Where it's like precise and perfect and didn't really go outside the box, but like all the other versions of that time, it was like that. I don't think they can play that anymore. In that way.
I agree. But songs that they can play that are just as precise, or hopefully, just as precise, but just as complicated, I think, is David Bowie, which has a lot of fun drums during the introduction right from the start. And the jam starts in about 5 minutes with descending quarter notes that turn bluesy within a minute. So this Bowie kind of takes a lot of turns. It goes to the usual ending jam, but then it takes a detour at 9 minutes with 1994 Chaos, which is some of my favorite kind of jamming. You want me to be happy? Put on any version of David Bowie from 1994.
Yeah, it was really impressive to hear them play it in a way where you could still tell they're on top of their game, for David Bowie in particular. I love how around 6.5, 7 minutes, Trey's got a melody and he's pulling the band along with it. It's a few note melody that he just basically comes up with and drives that jam. And then you're right, it peaks around, a few minutes later, but then backs off and peaks again. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I thought they were playing almost too fast for their own good. Like it almost goes off the rails for half of the song.
Yeah.
But they do get back on track, and it becomes quite intense right before it ends into the Hoist influence of If I Could, which I love hearing this song live.
Yeah, they really don't play it that much anymore at all. And at the time, and it's funny that people complain about Phish playing their new songs. It's what they do.
Yeah, that's
what they've always done. Exactly. They'll have new songs and they will play the ones and figure out the ones that people like and that they like. They'll keep playing those and drop the other ones and move on to the next ones. And they've always done that.
Always. It happens when there's a new album or when there's just a new crop of songs. It happens every time there's a new Halloween album, and they just have to try out a few and see which ones fall into their placement of the set list. Phish has always flubbed some of their music. Like there is never a time when everything was flawless. So what's old is new. It never changes.
Yeah, and it's funny because this is kind of a spoiled thing to say, but because I saw a lot of shows in 92 and 93, I saw Foam and It's Ice and Rift over and over almost every single night, to the point where they start playing these songs, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm hearing this song again. And now you'd be so happy to hear it. But then I guess we had an abundance of riches or something.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, they were just so prolific in their songwriting in the early 90s, like they could barely keep up with themselves, but everything seemed, I don't want to say was flawless because I would be contradicting myself immediately, but when you listen to certain shows over and over again, which I think fans like you and I of a certain age did, it seemed that they were flawless, that they never made mistakes. But once you give a listen to a full tour or even a week's long run of shows, you hear that there are botches here and there for songs that are very technically challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, well, we're going to get into this right now, but
Yeah.
let's talk about the punch you in the eye, because it actually, despite the fact that they mess up the beginning, basically
Right,
they mess up they miss the intro, but once they get going, it's really cool, especially Page's sound, the organ sound that he's got going. It's really awesome.
Yeah, I agree. It is great once it gets going, but that first minute or so, and Fishman is playing the drum beat, I almost couldn't tell if it was Punch You in the Eye or 2001.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm sure they knew what it was, but Trey was probably distracted or something. He just completely missed where he was supposed to come in.
And after Punch You in the Eye, you and I were talking about this song right before we hit record, Harry Hood, which first of all has a beautiful segue from Punch You in the Eye. Fishman's drum fill rolls straight from the end of the previous song as the drum roll that starts Harry Hood. And the jam that starts is repetitive to start. Mike kind of leads it with his bass at 8 minutes. And then it starts, I don't know the word. It's beautiful, it's fluid, and it just kind of swirls in these strength building peaks that just come up and up and up. It says something that this version of Harry Hood is not necessarily a cited version of the best versions of Harry Hood from 1994, that this would get like a second or third place trophy.
Yeah, we were talking about this. So, I had listened to this and then I went through and listened to all the spring tour Harry Hoods. And while this isn't the best version, it is an amazing version of Harry Hood. And going back to what we're talking about with Mike basically drives this jam from the middle. He basically latches onto a couple notes and pulls the band along with him in a way that's completely unique, to the point where it's funny. If you look on Phish.net on the reviews that are on there, there are a handful of people that review the show and say that this is their very favorite Harry Hood ever. So, everyone has their own favorite, but this is that good that there are people that even say it's the best. The other interesting thing that I noticed and had to do some research around was they do this extended vocal thing where instead of saying, they basically stretch out the words at the end. And this is something that they were doing from the early 90s through probably the mid 90s, but then stopped and still don't do. So it was interesting. I was wondering if it was just the show, but it certainly wasn't. It was what they did all the time in that era.
Are you talking about the You Could Feel Good About Hood coda?
Yes. Yeah. Where they basically stretch out the hood and good words in a way that they do not anymore.
Right. To me, that is the template of the song because they do that, I believe, on the version that's on a live one. And to me, if it's on a live one, that's canon. That's how every song, every version of the song since then should be judged against. That's just
I agree.
My curmudgeon speaking.
Yeah. Well, and apparently there was a bootleg CD that came out of this show it was the Simple Bootleg. And it was circulating in 1998. I had no idea, but we'll get to why it was called the Simple Bootleg when we get to set 2.
Yeah, it's coming. But we're not there yet because set 1 closes with Golgi Apparatus, a good old-fashioned, energetic closer. Nothing outstanding, nothing underwhelming. It just is, and it's a good way to go into set break.
Oh, and Trey says, don't do anything we wouldn't do.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode.
Set 2.
Set 2 opens with Susie Greenberg, which, if Golgi Apparatus is a perfect, quick, rocking closer, Susie Greenberg is a perfect, quick, rocking opener. And they had some really good, play along with one another improvisation games, about 3.5 minutes where Paige will play one rhythm, and then Fishman joins in on the next go-round of it before the whole band is playing this riff, and they rock it out. Even with the woo from, I think, Fishman. Someone's excited in the band.
Yeah, they're very into it. It didn't really go off. It's still pretty much in the box, but it is high energy and they're having a great time. So much of a great time that they end up in the next song.
Peaches in Regalia, a killer segue, again from Fishman, similar to the opening of set 1 with kind of another opener after the first opener.
Yeah,
and the Hobbits have second breakfast. We're having second openers.
Exactly. And this may have been the only Peaches that I saw in that era. I don't know, but I'm happy that I saw it.
Well, it's become something of a rarity. It still is. I don't think it's ever been that regularly played.
I don't think so either. And I mean, people, they have all their reasons. Maybe it's just a hard one to play. I love the one from Vegas 96.
Yeah,
that's a version that I love.
Yep. And I love the versions that were played on the July 91 tour with the horns, just because the song was written with horns. So it only makes sense. But aside from that tour, I can't think of a tour where Peaches was played with regularity. So it's always fun to get, before they go right into My Friend, with, again, a normal version with the required insanity toward the end.
Yeah, my notes on this is a pretty standard read of the song, right? It's again, it's pretty much stays in the box. It's good, but it isn't, it doesn't do anything special.
Right. It's an average great Phish show so far, with highlights, of course, in David Bowie and Harry Hood in the first set, with another one coming right up with Reba, 94 Rebas. You want to skip straight to it if you have the tape.
This is an incredible version of Reba. I mean, again, not my favorite version ever, but I mean, as good as it gets for that era. It is incredible. They really hit it halfway through the song. We were talking about it earlier. It goes silent in the middle, a handful of times where the show goes silent, probably because of the venue, probably because they had the audience eating out of their hands. I don't know. But this and Harry Hood are the two big jam highlights of the show. Like, if you're going to listen to anything in this show, listen to Harry Hood and the Reba.
I agree with that it's certainly the highlight of the second set at this point. And again, there, like you mentioned, there's quiet parts at 6 minutes and 20 seconds I marked down. And then the jam really builds around 9 minutes with this like chordal riff that Trey plays at 9 minutes. And then Fishman joins in. And again, it becomes a whole band progression. There's this, you can tell that they're playing their improvisational games and practices during band practice where someone comes up with some riff, another member of the band has to echo it, and then a third member of the band has to echo it before they all play it, and someone else starts something new. Whether it's one of the hey exercises or just kind of another game that they invented for themselves, this is the version of it where they're now using what they've practiced and now putting it into practice. They're applying it, and it's so much fun. It is. This is an incredible Reba. And you could say that about almost every 1994 Reba, but it's part of why we love this song. They really play well together. They really drive each other to this peak. It's really something great to hear. Yeah, especially at the end, Trey is playing with his wah-wah pedal with he's like trilling at the top of his guitar neck, and then explosive guitar-led jamming. It ends with no whistling in Reba, and then another quiet start to the Lizards, which is next. Again, nothing out of the ordinary, but very pleasant listening.
Yeah, nice crisp piano from Page, nice crescendo around 7 minutes. It's a good Lizards. And if you love Lizards, it's, a great version of Lizards.
And the shadow of Hoist comes back with Julius, which is only the second song from the album so far. I was surprised that there wasn't more at this point. We're about halfway through the second set with a big guitar jam at 4 minutes. Otherwise, it's about as standard as you're going to get for Julius.
Pretty much. And for me, it was my first time ever seeing Julius. It was played for the first time in April. So basically, they'd been playing the song for 8 weeks. This is the first time I'd heard it. It gets kind of crazy at 5 minutes and keeps going in the way that it normally does. You could already tell that it had a future as a set closer.
But yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. And even though they might not have known that yet, because Julius is a good utility player. You could play like Golgi in a way. You could place it anywhere, like an encore, a set closer, a set opener. It's always good to hear Julius. It could be placed anywhere in a set list. And then next, I wanted to ask you about this portion of the show where they play Nellie Kane acoustic with no microphones with a special guest of Morgan Fichtner, I believe how it's pronounced, on violin. I looked up who this person is. I didn't really know her name. And so she's a well-known Bay Area musician, I found out, best known for having played with Camper von Beethoven.
And Camper Van Beethoven was a Santa Cruz band. So it's from where I'm from, which is an hour south of San Francisco. At the time, they liked to have guests. At this time, they were big on the bluegrass thing. So basically, this show goes from a Phish show to a hoedown. Like, it basically goes on a dime. So all the amplification goes away. It's basically single mic. It sounds like a hoedown, a bluegrass show. You have it's fun, but unfortunately, the crowd basically talks over Nellie Kane. And by the time they get to My Mind's Got a Mind of Its Own, people are more quiet so you can hear it better.
Are you a yeller or are you a shusher?
A shusher. I want to hear the show, So I prefer to hear I put a lot of effort into going to see music. There's no venue that's closer to an hour from my house. If I'm going to go that far to see music, I'd like to hear the music and not hear the people around me.
Yeah, fair enough. It's funny how you said that the crowd got quieter for My Mind's Got a Mind of Its Own. I wrote something similar, but as a teacher, I wrote the crowd is much better behaved during this song. It's just where my mind goes.
Yeah, I mean, basically, and the hoedown was over after My Mind's Got a Mind of Its Own. And then we get to the special part of the show,
which opens with Mike's song, which is a killer choice, right? To go from an acoustic hoedown to straight weird rock and roll. Interestingly, if you look at the timings of each track, Mike's song is only 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Like, we know we're toward the end of the set and the run of the Warfield, so why not go out with a bang? But if you're the type who likes a big Mike song, this is not for you, because it goes into the debut of Simple after 2 minutes.
It does, but it's such a crazy thing where the Mike song is so intense and the intensity is kind of droning. It's the best way for me to describe it is it's a drone, that they've got like a droning sound that's going on. It's very intense. They do mics, they do Simple in this drone, and then the drone keeps going and they go back into mics. And that's really exciting. Like they're kind of living between the two songs. This was the very first time that they actually played Simple. And then it kind of goes almost type 2, around 5 minutes of this Simple jam where it dissolves into almost nothing. And it's really cool. It's really unique. It's really, at the time, if you listen to shows around that era, this doesn't happen that much, where they just kind of go into outer space. And then out of outer space comes this opera singer.
Yeah. I just want to put a couple words about that Simple before we get to the opera singer. It seemed like for a debut, these days at least, and for most of their career, Phish would have a song down pat when they debut it for an audience. It's practiced, everyone knows their parts. It doesn't always get a great response, right? Because the audience is part of that. And so, I was there at the debut at Jones Beach for, I think it was Stealing Time from the Faulty Plan and Kill Devil Falls. And it was, I won't say silent, but it was muted. It was a muted applause, a muted response from the audience. But this Simple, it seemed like the band was not all on the same page when they segued into it. It seems like everyone was playing their own version of Simple in a different key, even. It doesn't sound like they practiced the segue, although, of course, we all know it would write itself to great effect for the rest of the year. Mics into Simple is now as normal as mics into Hydrogen.
Yeah, and to be honest, it seems like they kind of fell backwards into it.
Yes, it does.
Right? They're playing something and they're like, wow, this kind of sounds like the song we're working on, and we might as well just go for it.
Well, interestingly, they were going to include Simple on Hoist. Mike wrote it, right? And he wrote what I think I read was a bluegrass version of the song, like a country version of the song. And it just kind of developed into a rocker, but it was left on the cutting room floor for Hoist. Doesn't matter because it sounds like unlike any other version of Simple that you've heard before or since. And you're right, at the end, there's like an odd mic bass riff at 11 minutes and some background drone from Trey that, again, slows down and quiets down, with Fishman softly keeping a beat on a China cymbal, of all things. So this is very odd, and to your words, a special part of the show when, let's see, I got this on Phish.net, an opera singer named Andrea Baker is singing. I apologize to anyone here who's either a fan of opera or speaks Italian. O mio barbaro caro, which is a Puccini aria. Raucous applause from the audience once she finishes. I could barely hear her on the recording, but everyone there seemed to have no problem.
Yeah, we were just completely stunned. It was so unexpected. And that's, again, part of why I love Phish is, out of this total chaos of Mike's song and Simple and them dissolving into nothing, you've got an opera singer doing an aria, and then you're back to Phish.
Yeah, and what a closing, because we're already at the end of the set, which is a very long version of Possum. And when I say long, the whole track isn't that extended, but the intro, Fishman's seems to go on forever. And is this when they were giving out the macaroni and cheese boxes?
They were. So basically, they gave everybody in the audience a Flintstones Kraft macaroni and cheese box, and we were instructed to shake them along with Possum and the encore, but we'll get to that in a minute. And you can hear them saying it in the song. You can hear them shaking a box. One of them must be on stage. Maybe it's Fishman shaking it into the mic. He's like, shake your macaroni, shake it, shake it. It was really an awesome crowd participation moment. And it's funny because in my memory, when we left, we donated this food into this for the local food pantries. And Trey actually tells everybody to do that before the encore. And I forgot about that.
That's so Phish to not just think about how layered this is, right? So it's a way to get the audience participation, right? The audience, get them involved in the music. They give out macaroni and cheese boxes, like the most utilitarian type of food you can get that can double as a maraca, right? So you got that going on with the whole audience. They tease the Flintstones theme at 4 minutes. So now it's kind of getting meta. And then at the end, it's all for a positive purpose to donate to a local food pantry.
Yeah, and Trey even says it. He's like, you can be happy to know that part of your admission price tonight is going to feed the homeless
That's
or
fabulous.
the hungry or something. And I was like, this is fantastic. And I started doing events the next year or the year after locally in Santa Cruz and in San Francisco. And once every couple months, I think, partly influenced by this, we had nights where admission was bring a can of food.
That's wonderful. You know what? They should try and reinstate that, especially in Northern California. No shade meant to San Francisco, but I think that there is a homeless problem that at least a little bit of donation to food pantries could help.
For sure. For sure.
And that's the end of the second set. Possum closes it, and the encore, much to your happiness, is Fire.
Yeah. Yeah. So I looked this up because I wasn't sure how many times I'd seen Fire, how common it was. It hasn't, I think they've only played it 10 times since they've been back since 3-0. I've seen it 3 times. I saw it once at the Crest Gamehenge show in Sacramento in 1993. I saw them play it this time at this macaroni and cheese show, and I saw them do it during the Baker's Dozen. All so it helps me put this show where it belongs in the special canon of shows for me, because I will honestly never forget, shaking the macaroni and cheese along with Possum. It's a great Possum and it's a great Fire.
Right. Fire Baptizes, a great show for you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's a great show if they play the Fire.
Well, Adam, thank you so much first of all, for coming back to the podcast, for taking the initiative to get in touch with me to say, hey, there's a great show we should acknowledge. And I was so glad you did, because like I said at the very beginning of our conversation, I knew other shows within 48 hours of this one, but I had never listened to a recording. I never had the tape, and I never thought to go back when it's digital now to listen to it. And you called my attention to a show that has a lot of cool running themes going through it, whether it's playing softly and getting louder, whether it's each member of the band starting an improvisation game and then everyone joining in, the macaroni, like you just said, with Possum, and an opera singer, which I never knew anything about. So you really brought a lot to my attention, and I hope to the attention of our listeners. So thank you again.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure. I'm happy to do it. Someday we'll talk about the Gamehenge show.
Oh, yeah, we'll get there for sure.
Maybe for the 40-year anniversary. God willing, right?
And that's it for today's conversation with Adam Jerugim. And I'm proud to say we don't have much of a fact check today, but we got to double check a few things. So now it is time for a very short attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
The week of this show, May 27th, 1994, included a show on the 23rd in Portland, Oregon, this 3-night stand at the Warfield, and then 2 shows at the Laguna Seca Days Festival on the 28th and 29th in Monterey. I had tapes of those shows in Monterey, but never had any tapes of these 3 Warfield shows. The Phil and Friends shows at the Warfield that Adam references were covered on a very long episode of Attendance Bias with Charlie Dirksen of Phish.net and the Mockingbird Foundation. It's one of my favorite episodes of Attendance Bias, and if you're interested in listening, it aired on April 15th, 2024. At the time of this recording, Peaches and Regalia has been played 82 times by Phish. The calendar year in which it was played the most was 1988, when it was played 21 times. At the end of today's conversation, Adam suggests that he can come back onto the podcast to talk about Phish's Gamehenge show at the Crest Theater in Sacramento from March 1993. I didn't have the heart to tell him in real time that the show has already been covered on the podcast with guest Mikey Reppy. If you're interested, that episode was released on May 31st, 2023. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Adam Jerugim for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode, and the Mockingbird Foundation for everything they do for music education. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show. You could visit www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can. You can also follow Attendance Bias on social media, and please leave a rating and a review on whichever podcast app you use. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.